the framing around Bitcoin and crypto's usage of energy is really bad, right? Because essentially what the critics and what the mainstream media have done is said any conversation about crypto or any conversation about Bitcoin must be framed in terms of its environmental impact, when in fact, the opposite is true, right? Any conversation about Bitcoin's environmental impact has to be framed in context of its benefits.
This is a tweet by Mike Voorhees. I don't know who that is. Anyways, doesn't make a difference. The public ledger, okay, will be very useless with Lightning. And I prefer public money that uses a private database. What? Public money that uses a private database. Okay. So people don't know what I own and what I buy. Yes, Bitcoin comes with high fees, uses more energy than generated by the sun, and comes with government surveillance. Anyways, so look, this is an entire thread that Walker is building of complete no-coiner nonsense. And that last one, I don't understand where they get this now. So look, David, maybe I remember you put out this great paper dispelling and essentially clarifying a lot of the Bitcoin energy use. So I just want to make sure that I understood that. Uses more energy than generated by the sun. So that didn't make much sense to me. Are we even close? So Bitcoin is somehow using more energy than the energy that's generated by the sun? I don't know if you can help our listeners out a little bit.
Yeah, that's not true.
And that's it.
and that's it.
That's awesome. Okay, let me ask you this. Let's try to explain, I guess, Bitcoin's energy, because to me, I think that is the biggest FUD point, right? That people come back to over and over again. And we always try to explain it. Bitcoin uses increased energy indeed. But what in your eyes is the value proposition of Bitcoin using all of that energy to secure its ledger, its blockchain?
Yeah, well, I think where you have to start is by recognizing that the framing around Bitcoin and crypto's usage of energy is really bad, right? Because essentially what the critics and what the mainstream media have done is said any conversation about crypto or any conversation about Bitcoin must be framed in terms of its environmental impact, when in fact, the opposite is true, right? Any conversation about Bitcoin's environmental impact has to be framed in context of its benefits. And so that's like just number one. If you're reading an article that's talking about why Bitcoin is bad for the environment, that doesn't at least attempt to make the case for the value that Bitcoin can provide, you can pretty much write off that source that you're reading as just like utter propaganda. Because of course, if something has no utility and no value, it doesn't really matter how much energy it uses. Any energy that's used by something that creates zero value is of course a waste. So I think you've got to start by just flipping the conversation on its head and saying, do you understand the value that Bitcoin provides to its users, to the United States, and to like the world at large? And if you can reach some relative consensus about what those values are, then you can start asking the question, does this use too much energy? So then you get to point number two, which is that Bitcoin's value is inherently tied to its consensus mechanism, like proof of work. And people say, proof of work is the innovation. And so what you see is people like Greenpeace and Chris Larson and the Ripple folks who say you can get all the same benefits of Bitcoin as long as you switch to proof of stake. You can get all of those benefits and just reduce energy consumption by 99%. Again, if you hear someone making that argument without acknowledging that A, Bitcoin isn't going to switch consensus mechanisms, and B, that those two things are not interchangeable, again, it's a really good sign that you're being lied to. I think that the most generous and fair way to explain it would be to suggest that Bitcoin, or rather that proof of work and proof of stake are, let's just say, distinct technologies with distinct aims, right? Like if I'm speaking to a policymaker, I may not go on a rant about like why I think proof of stake is fundamentally flawed and bad. What I will do is say these aren't the same thing. They're solving for very different things, and you can't just kind of assume that they can trade in and out. And then what I would say is that the two biggest differences between proof of stake and proof of work are fairness and security, right? The amount of Bitcoin that you own has no effect on your ability to control the network, to order transactions, to put new transactions on a block. And proof of stake is the opposite. Whereas in Bitcoin, the amount of Bitcoin you hold affords you no particular control. In a proof of stake network, the amount of the staked asset that you give, in turn gives you more of that native asset for staking it, which in turn gives you more power. So wealth compounds, as does the ability to sort of influence the network, decide which transactions appear on the next block. And so you get a system that, whether or not it works isn't good, right? Like there's no part of a system that just says, oh, if you start off with more money, you are mathematically guaranteed to perpetually make more money that's attractive to anyone except someone who's in the top 1% already. So that's kind of the fairness piece. And there's more that you could get into there. But then you get into the security piece. In order for Bitcoin to be meaningfully disrupted, you'd have to control over 50% of the hash rate. Meanwhile, and so an example would be, you saw China ban, and really the network could still run even if it lost like 90 something percent of its hash rate. So you see China ban mining, it loses half of its computational power, and TikTok next block, nothing matters with Bitcoin. It's fine. You compare that to proof of stake, where you see that, if more than 33% of its validators go offline, the entire network shuts down, which means that proof of stake is particularly vulnerable to attacks, to internet outages. Already this year, you saw Polygon have an 11-hour outage. You saw Solana or a 4-hour outage. You saw Solana have an 11-hour outage in January. And then just in March, Solana had 6 outages. And then yesterday, Solana had another one.
Yeah.
And so, there are so many sort of people who have written at length about the fundamental issues with proof of stake. Now, I'm not a computer scientist. And so I think the claim that I would be very comfortable making, that it's, again, a kind of moderate middle ground perspective, is that they're not interchangeable, that proof of work is what makes Bitcoin valuable and what makes Bitcoin Bitcoin. And that if you're going to suggest that Bitcoin switch to proof of stake, you've got to recognize that A, there's no company that you can lobby and go ask to do that. It's probably not going to happen. And B, you need to recognize that you're basically giving up the fundamental properties that make Bitcoin a good global money. And then the question you ask yourself is, if I'm making a transaction, whether it's buying groceries or, executing a financial trade, do I want to live in a world in which, an internet outage can stop money from working? And I think the answer is pretty obviously no.
Yeah, but sorry. I just want to add about the internet piece, because I always find that super funny, right? If the whole internet around the world goes out, do we really care about Bitcoin? Like, forget about even the internet, right? Like, I always hear these arguments from from no coiners. Well, what happens if there's no electricity? Like, do you really think that all you're worrying about at that point is that there's no money? Like, do you really think that it's your credit card that's the problem? Like, this is what I don't understand. Like, these people need the end of the freaking world. They need to be in a cave to be like, you see, Bitcoin failed. I couldn't use it in my cave. It's like, you know what? There's way bigger problems at that point. I'm not worried about Bitcoin anymore.
Yeah, that's like saying
honestly, awesome answer.
That's like saying that a lifeboat isn't hurricane rated. Like, all right, sorry, if the hurricane capsizes our boat, like, yes, the lifeboat's not going to work, but that, your problem won't be that. Your problem will be that you're drowning. Like, it's the same thing.